Okay, I have with me today Dr. Martyn Pitman. He's been on the channel previously, obstetrician gynecologist. We're going to discuss several different issues today, and Martin has also prepared something that hasn't been seen before that we think is significant. But we're going to talk about a few of the topics first, and then probably answer some questions from you as well. So first of all, say hello to Martin and thank you for joining us.
Hello again, Chris, and many thanks for inviting me back. And looking forward to our chat today.
Yeah, no problem. Um, so first of all, as we're recording this, quite recently, the Thirlwall inquiry has provided its latest update, and its recent updates are all the same. We're not going to do anything, basically, is the update. So we were discussing this before we started recording, and I thought it would be a good thing to begin with. What are your reflections on this latest update of sorts from the Thirlwall inquiry?
But firstly, it's just a cut and paste of what's happened before, isn't it? It's yet another delay. But I think if you look at it globally now, with the repeat delays in launching the Thirlwall inquiry report, and if you ally that to the fact that the Cheshire coroner has, off the back of that, decided to delay the reopening of the inquest into the poor babies. If you take a step back from that and think, well, why would they be doing that, particularly with the Thirlwall inquiry? Because in Lady Justice Thirlwall, you don't get into that sort of position unless you're incredibly bright and intelligent. So that is beyond doubt. And she was obviously very, very particular before she started about the terms of reference for that, and made it perfectly clear that she wasn't going to relitigate and that Lucy Letby was undoubtedly guilty. And so the entirety of the Thirlwall inquiry predated on the fact that Letby was guilty, and she wasn't interested in what she quoted as the noise behind it, which is presumably what you, me, and the myriad of other people that are questioning it were producing. So she then sat through months of evidence, and she's made out of that presumably what most of us have made out of it, in that despite the legion of barristers' attempts to divert questioning away from anything that wasn't going to fit in with the Letby is guilty narrative and may raise questions about her being innocent. Despite all that, there was a very, very significant amount of information that came out, which must have questioned whether all of the evidence was presented in court and to the jury. And now we're in a situation where, presumably, if she was dead certain about the terms of reference being appropriate for the investigation and the evidence that was presented to her, then she would have written the report now and would be keen to get it done and dusted. But that isn't what we're seeing. We're seeing serial delays. So you have to ask yourself why. And I guess none of us will know until whatever pans out over the next few months. And then, of course, the intervention from the coroner delaying it. Well, the worst possible thing for that poor coroner is going to be to reopen the inquest into the babies and to presumably what there is pressure on him or her to do, which is to find unlawful death for the babies that Letby was charged for. And then if Letby's case gets referred through CCRC back to the Court of Appeal, then where does that leave them? Because if she does get exonerated, then the poor coroner is going to have to recall those cases yet again, I assume, to reverse those verdicts again. So the more you look at it, even if you try to look at it from a state of complete impartiality, the more you think, well, there's got to be a very legitimate reason for both of those esteemed individuals to make this call. And it makes far more sense if they're doing that because they are concerned that this is going to go where it should, through the CCRC and back to the Court of Appeal, and is going to radically change the situation. I can't perceive of a situation where that isn't the case, really. So it's fascinating. And then, of course, hanging over it is the one fixed point in all this is Dame Vera Baird's period of tenure at the CCRC, which I believe terminates towards the end of this year, and there can't be many more high-profile cases that she is supervising the reassessment of than the Lucy Letby case, and I would find it fairly inconceivable that she's going to rugby pass the Lucy Letby case to her incoming replacement, whenever that is at the end of the year. So I would imagine that she's going to make absolutely sure that the work is done on that, and the decision is made before she moves on to pastures new. And I can't help but think these new appointments they've made at CCRC, a couple of them being medics, one of them with a fairly impressive academic history. I can't believe that's a coincidence, and I would imagine, pretty sure I know which case is going to be on the top of their email inbox when they get into post. It's almost certainly going to be the Letby case, so that they can look through the evidence and make an assessment on that as well. So interesting times, but barely a week goes by now where you don't see developments that I think are positive against the Letby is guilty narrative. I don't know what your view is on it, Chris. Whether you...
Well, I mean, I've thought about how I would write the report for Thirlwall. And I would consider myself to be a more accomplished writer than Lady Thirlwall. And I have no idea how you would do it, because the terms of reference, they forbid you from telling the truth. So if you don't tell the truth, then you have to go along with the public process. And the public process was all geared towards saying this all happened because of insipid bureaucrats, and in future cases should be referred to the police more quickly. Now, if she was to put that out tomorrow, she knows, as you say, there's no doubt she's an intelligent person. She knows she'd get an absolute hammering from multiple newspapers, Private Eye, TV, everything. It would be an enormously controversial conclusion. But the terms of reference really essentially forbid her from looking at the documents of the inquiry and drawing the conclusions, the kind of conclusions you would draw as a medic from those documents. So that leaves you with you've got two options. You either do something that you're not allowed to do because of the terms of reference, or you do something that's going to open you up to ridicule, basically. So once you're in that position, you're between a rock and a hard place, and the only thing you can do is just delay, then say, oh, look, the Court of Appeal is looking at this. We can't possibly release the report now. There's also the possibility, I don't know if people have considered this, but there's also the possibility that she has written the report already, and she knows we cannot release this report for contextual political reasons. But she knows, well, I can't refine the report because it would be too complicated. And also, because I'm hamstrung by the terms of reference, I don't know how I would refine anyway. So I think we will simply never see this report, is my view. But we'll have to wait and see. I could be completely wrong, but I just don't know how you would actually write the report.
I'm far from an expert on these sort of inquiries, but I'm fairly sure it's pretty unprecedented, the situation that we're in. It's going to be, it's like a tactic. Well, your realm is, it's like a tactical game of chess, really, and he moves into the checkmate position first. But it's fascinating to see it all unfolding, really, and to surmise as to what the next step's going to be.
I guess a chess analogy would be Lady Thirlwall's got a really, really bad position, and she's just desperately trying to cling on for a draw at best. It's not going to. I mean, this inquiry is not going to go down in history as, oh, the Thirlwall inquiry. That's a really highly regarded, respected investigation, is it? It's just damage limitation for her, really.
I don't even know who's presumably would have to be Secretary of State, would it? That would say, oh no, okay, this was kicked off on a false premise, and now we need to just bin it. I presume that would have to be the government minister that would make that decision, because when you think, was it 17 million it's cost so far, and I can't imagine the ongoing delay is without cost. So
But realistically, it's more than that, isn't it? So, well, I mean, with regard to the government and the state, it would have to be a state level decision. I don't know who would ultimately make that decision, but yeah, it'd have to be. Now, I did speak to someone about this, and they told me that it's perfectly legitimate for Lady Thirlwall to go back to the state privately and say, look, these terms of reference don't work. Look at the situation. We need to do something. But, you know, I mean, there's so much going on in the government at the moment. I mean, we were discussing this before we started. Obviously, it's not as if there aren't other things for the government to deal with. So the terms of reference of the Thirlwall inquiry may not be particularly high on their agenda at this point. Um, so I don't know. I don't know what would happen, but I just think the most likely outcome is she's going to just delay, 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 and then say, "Oh, look, we can't do anything now because there's the Court of Appeal," and that's just a kind of low-key way she can extricate herself from what has become an impossible situation. And I'm sure right at the start of this whole thing, when I think there was a letter written by 24 experts sent to the Thirlwall inquiry, and she dismissed that as noise. I think she probably thought, "Oh, this will never materialize into anything major," or maybe she thought that. And I think she's probably been a little bit surprised. I mean, this is naive, I think, by obviously it's grown and grown as we probably knew that it would. And I think she probably thought, I mean, it is. She's experienced in the law. She knows it's so rare, unprecedented again, to have this level of scrutiny over a conviction with this level of media support and this level of public support. Probably it took an enormous amount of time for that to happen with the Birmingham Six, for example. And she probably thought, oh yeah, someone's written a letter, but I'll just rubbish it and then it will just disappear because that's what always happens. She probably had no idea what was going to happen next. So yeah, she's in a very difficult situation now, but given the amount of money she's been paid, I don't feel an enormous amount of sympathy for her. So
and,
yeah,
and you can be absolutely sure when and if it gets to the Court of Appeal, that's it. Then that's going to be no Thirlwall report until they've concluded, because it would be ridiculous.
yeah,
So that could, as we all know, that could be years ahead.
yeah. I mean, hopefully, I do think the Court of Appeal will expedite this case, but we obviously we don't know the period of. It can be 5, 6 years from now for the to have.
I'm gonna disagree with you on that front, because I think there is a huge there's going to be huge pressure for them to go as slowly as they possibly can, because when you think the ramifications, if they're going to turn this over and
Hmm,
exonerate her, because I've always said I don't believe there is any possibility this could go back for a retrial,
hmm,
for two reasons. One, because I cannot see how you could claim that you could select a jury that have not had their opinions changed by the amount of press and media attention that's led up to the conviction and has developed after it. And
hmm,
secondly, I think the CPS are going to realise how incredibly difficult it's going to be to get credible experts to back up Dowie Evans's ridiculous theories. Um, and then if you add on to that the difficulties that Cheshire Police with their investigation that is going to be torpedoed when people start looking at this, and the governance in the trust, and the fact that if she does get exonerated, what that means to certain people at the trust that are going to start to be looking over their shoulders. It's huge, Chris.
hmm,
Absolutely. And it stands a chance. If it happens, then this is going to have absolutely monstrous ramifications and repercussions for every single organisation that were involved in it, from the governance of NHS Trust right up to the judiciary. So I have a feeling the Court of Appeal will want to just kick the can down the road as long as they feasibly can, because it's going to be huge.
hmm.
The fact that Wes Streeting has moved on, potentially significant, because I'm struggling to think of many things that individual did achieve. He spoke a good game, but he didn't actually play a good game. But one of the few things that he was absolutely dictatorially certain about was Lucy Letby's guilt. So I think the fact that he's moved on might be a positive. And the fact if Andy Burnham does get in as Labour leader, bearing in mind he actually comes from up that way, but that could work both ways, couldn't it? So I don't know. There's so many huge questions that hopefully will be addressed in the next few months, years.
So did you see what Peter Hitchens wrote about Wes Streeting today?
Yes.
I'll read it out for people. I could never understand. I could never understand why Mr. Wes Streeting has such a large fan club. I never heard him say anything original or saw him do anything out of the ordinary. But I did notice his obstinate refusal to consider the possibility that the case against Lucy Letby might need to be reopened. Surely he was not afraid that the real culprit in the hospital where she was accused of murdering babies was the poor state of the NHS. Just a little bit he's done in his column today, but yeah, I mean,
I'm sure there'll be people out there, particularly from the maternity side, that will challenge me on this. And they may say, oh, without Wes Streeting, we wouldn't have had the level of investigation into our cases. But he's agreed to the opening up of the initially Nottingham, although that predated him, but more recently Leeds and most recently Brighton. And I think the parents that tragically are still grieving the loss or injury to their babies or mothers will have a degree of gratitude to him, but it's desperately sad that he won't be there to see it through. And I hate to say it, but I think the way he's handled the initiation of the Amos review and waiting for Donna Rockenden's report from Nottingham again smacks to me of kicking the can down the road without wanting to make any crunchy decisions. We've already got nearly 800 recommendations from existing maternity reviews that are yet to be properly actioned. So why we need more reviews? So I just, and now he's, whatever happens, he's now no longer health secretary, so he won't be picking up the decision process and forcing the change that is so desperately overdue in UK maternity services. Yeah. So it's from every direction. It's a fascinating time.
Absolutely. I guess I just mentioned to conclude this topic. I alluded to this a few times on screen, but I didn't want to say specifically because I didn't have time to ask her if it's okay. But I think it'll be fine now. Stephanie told me that the coronial process was just never going to go ahead. So she was absolutely right about that. So I mean, that's been pushed back to, is it May next year or something? I can't remember what it was now, but I mean, it probably will just never happen until the mess has been resolved, which is an enormous mess.
I mean, ultimately, from every perspective, whether you're pro-Letby or anti-Letby, it's the poor parents for the cases in Cheshire that you've got to have at the forefront of your mind. And I know the anti-Letby lobby always criticise us for not caring about the parents, and I really resent that. I mean, I spent my entire career, caring for couples expecting babies, and a critical part of that job was caring for them, looking after them, and hopefully being as compassionate as you possibly can to them when things don't go to plan. Even if that was completely unavoidable. So I really resent the fact that what we're doing is ignoring the psychological status and the distress and grief that the parents are suffering, because that's very far from it. It's basically, my whole stance on this was because I realised a long while ago that the medical, in inverted commas, evidence that had been recruited to secure Letby's conviction was frankly a joke. And what's worse, an innocent person being in prison and parents having been told that their poor babies were murdered, or the parents actually getting the truth, which is looking more and more like the fact that this was a scapegoating witch hunt to cover up negligently deficient care in yet another failing NHS trust. So hard as that is for the parents to be told one story and for that to be turned around, I think if I was a parent in this situation, I would want to know the truth. And I certainly wouldn't want somebody who wasn't implicated in it spending the rest of their days in prison.
Absolutely. I can't really add to that. I just echo those sentiments. Let's talk about the insulin study that has been released now, or at least the first iteration of it has been released.
Yeah.
So that, just to contextualize this for people, that gives very strong indication that not this supposed, the closest you get to a smoking gun in this case is the idea that insulin is very high, C-peptide is low, therefore this has to be the exogenous administration of insulin. Whereas in reality, when you look at this study looks at a variety of neonates across multiple previously peer-reviewed studies and finds that that's not true and that actually this kind of ratio is quite normal. So what were your thoughts on that and the kind of issues?
Yeah, if I may just go back a bit on whether people might be picking this up without having seen any of the earlier videos, Chris, that there was certain aspects of the structure, the timing, the format of the trial that I think were integral to its eventual outcome. And I think in the early, obviously I won't go through it all, but I think in the early stages of the trial, the two bits that I think were very, very deliberately planned was the early introduction of Lucy Letby's shift chart, which we all know was basically fabricated nonsense. But visually for the jury that were in the early sort of weeks, months of what turned out to be a 10-month trial, which must have been incredibly challenging to them psychologically and concentration-wise. To have that pictorially represented in the way it was presented and to be very early on in the case must have been incredibly directive in influencing every juror's opinion. Because when I saw it the first time, I thought, oh my God, that's condemning. And the insulin case is added to it, really. And I can't help but think that was, again, deliberate. I mean, it's years since I did any psychology, but there's this theory of when you're assimilating information, and you should always bear this in mind when you're doing a lecture. I remember being told that your takeaway messages for a lecture is primacy and recency. So, and what that basically says is when you're concentrating on something, you tend to recall most of what was told to you very first. So in this situation, I would say that would be the shift chart and the insulin cases, and then what was told to you just before everything closed, that would be the summing up. So, which again was equally emotive for the jurors, wasn't it? A lot of which we now know was fabricated and not actually true. So the insulin cases were early on, and I think they were deliberately selected for two reasons. One, because they were always labelled as the smoking gun cases, and we know why that was now, in that they were the only cases where there seemed to be a consensus of opinion between the prosecution's experts and the defence experts, and that was principally because Mike Hall, appointed for the defence, had to admit that he wasn't a diabetes or insulin expert, and he wasn't an endocrinologist. And he wasn't.
Can I just mention something in relation to this? So I think we must emphasise it's even to today. The notion is communicated and circulated that he conceded that the infants were poisonous. That's not true.
He didn't. He basically said he wasn't. I think his exact words were he was going to defer to Professor Hindmarsh because it was his area of specialist expertise. There's a big difference between deferring to somebody and agreeing with them.
Yeah.
And then of course added to that was the fact that when the police questioned Letby, and then that came up again when she was under cross-examination in the trial, she was told on both occasions that, well, the experts have said there's no alternative other than the baby's having been poisoned with insulin. Do you accept that? Now, I'm not in any way belittling nurses, neonatal nurses, or non-medics, but this was way above her pay grade as far as having that degree of knowledge. I mean, most doctors wouldn't know. So, and then of course, so she was pretty much forced to accept that because the expert said so, somebody in your unit must have poisoned these babies. And then her reply, quite understandably, yes, but it wasn't me. So you've got the poor jury that they've been shown the duty roster, and then they've been told in quick succession that there are these two cases, and both the prosecution and the defence have accepted that this happened. So we've got an agreement and then Judge Goss was very, very particular in summarising this and batting it home, that somebody must have poisoned these babies, and the only person that could have been was the lady who's in front of you. So it was there's certain ways that the court case was structured that can't have been a coincidence. That must have been deliberate.
Yeah.
This, and then of course now we know from Jeff Chase and Helen Shannon's involvement with the expert panel that this isn't the case. But I think the recent developments are very, very significant, because it looks to me as if what they're suggesting is new evidence that wasn't available at the time of the trial. So this was a letter written by both of them containing details of significant clinical trials, which basically back up their opinion that the court and the jurors having been told that there was no other feasible physiological explanation for the blood results in these babies, forgetting the fact that it appears the assays that were done were probably wholly inaccurate and they were never confirmed, which is a whole other issue. But their evidence suggests that these results weren't that unusual, in not just in neonates, but in neonates that had exactly the complications that some of these did, as in sepsis, infection, and other causes. So the detractors are coming out, so it's only a letter, it's not a scientific paper, but I understand there's more coming. And this journal is a high impact journal, and letters to the editor are checked by the editor, and they undergo a degree of peer review, although clearly that isn't the level of detail and checking that would happen in a full scientific research paper. But you can't really belittle an editor reviewed impact letter of that regard. And then the critical thing, and I haven't been obsessionally checking it, but normally in the scientific and particularly medical community, if a scientific paper gets published which is questionable or untrue or inaccurate, you normally don't struggle to get scientists, medics in that discipline coming back and saying, hold on a second, I don't agree with this. And I'm not aware of a tsunami of critics saying, no, this is just not correct. So I think that development was hugely significant, and obviously it just reiterates and backs up what they said at the press conference. But there's a big difference in making a claim than the situation that we appear to be in now, in that they've got the scientific research evidence to back up that claim, which is a whole different beast, really. So it's another string to the bow, isn't it? We're told that the Court of Appeal will only accept new evidence. Well, is this the smoking gun for Letby? Is this which would be ironic, really, wouldn't it? In that the two incident cases were deemed to be the smoking gun cases that she couldn't wriggle out of. Wouldn't it be ironic if the new evidence that turns the conviction around was on these two very cases? That would be highly ironic. But we'll see. Maybe there will be a string of condemning letters to the journal that present over the next few months. But I would have expected it to have happened by now if it was going to.
I don't think so, because these people are the top experts in the world, basically, and all these studies are peer reviewed as well. The ones that they've drawn on. And I think also when the original trial took place, Lucy faced the problem that many defendants face of getting experts in court for a contentious case. Now, I think the prosecution faces that problem, because let's say you were still working as a doctor, would you want to go into this case and defend the prosecution and have your name attached to it after Lucy's exonerated? I don't think many people will want to go in there unless they're absolutely certain they're correct. And of course, why would they be certain they're correct? Because we know how bad the science is in the original trial. No one is going to. I mean, I can say with absolute confidence, no one is going to go in there and defend the air embolism via the nasogastric tube. No one, because you'd just be destroying yourself overnight, wouldn't you? You're destroying your own reputation immediately. And I think just you won't see anyone going in for these insulin cases.
And
The
the
other
thing is that
thing,
the profile, if this does go back, Chris, is going to be so
Hmm.
much higher than even the profile. I mean, the profile of the case when it initially went through the courts was high, but that's going to
Hmm.
be nothing compared with
No.
what's going to happen if it goes back. So, and we already know that obviously the first choice of experts that the Cheshire Police went to for the cases that have just been rejected by the central CPS, their reports were clearly rubbished, and that the evidence presented didn't meet the threshold for further prosecution.
Yeah.
So presumably, that they would those individuals would be hesitant to put themselves up in a proper adversarial uh, court hearing again. So yeah, I agree. I agree.
And the other thing I wanted to mention as well with regards to the insulin cases is that it was, as you explained, it was presented as being a fait accompli. It was presented as being this is the only possible explanation. So that kind of diminished all of the logistical problems. So the logistical problems with the bags, the logistical problem that Lucy isn't on duty, all of the pharmacological criticism, the fact they weren't tested again, the fact there was no kind of allegations about she accessed the insulin here, she administered it via this methodology at this time in this place. Look, there's this amount of insulin missing. There's no trail, is there? There's no audit trail of anything. Oh, there's the sticky insulin. I mean, that's basically a load of rubbish as far as I can see. That theory is just had to be invented to explain things away. There are other issues to do with glucose. There are other issues to do with um, whether or not it's pharmacologically possible. All of these things just kind of melted away because they were told, but it's still the only possible explanation. There is no other possible explanation. Now you have to look at the situation and say, okay, here's all these incredibly unlikely things and all these holes in the prosecution case, but now there is, we know it's not the only possible explanation. In fact, it's not even that unusual. So at that point, what becomes the more likely explanation? The fact that it's just a naturally occurring mechanism that can happen quite a lot in neonates, or this intricate prosecution series of unlikely events. And then on top of that, we know there's the third infant that was never in the court
Yeah,
case because it's hyperinsulinism.
congenital hyperinsulinism. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So if you put all
I mean,
that
I
together,
don't.
what's the more likely explanation?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel very sorry for the. I was thinking the other day, if I was a juror, obviously being trying to imagine being non-medical, and if you're one of the jurors, I wonder how much interest you would put into how this is developing, and how guilty would you feel. And I don't feel any resentment towards them, because I think they were sold a very, very clever story. And of course, the following on from what we just discussed was then Judge Goss coming in. I think it was about the same time after, so they've been presented the rota, they've been presented the smoking gun incident cases. Somebody had to have poisoned them, and it could only be Letby. And then Judge Goss pipes up that, oh well, if you've decided that the defendant is guilty of one murder, then don't trouble yourself with thinking about the mode of death for the others, because if you think she's guilty of one, then you can just assume that she's guilty for the others. If you think that's, don't worry about the mode of death. I mean, so it really was a three-line whip, wasn't it, by them to get it across the line. So I don't think we can question the jurors. I think it was an incredibly complex case. That it was the 11 in the end, wasn't it? Because one of them bailed out early on when I mean, that was interesting as well, because I didn't realise until very recently that the reason they were asked to leave was because they were overheard
Yeah.
talking about the case very early on, saying everybody's decided she's guilty already.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it ironic somebody gets kicked off the panel of jurors because they were telling the truth? The way it had been structured, it was inevitable that the jurors would find. The whole thing is just it's terrifying. It's
Yeah.
absolutely terrifying. Every single member of the healthcare fraternity, and I think every member of the general public, should be absolutely terrified that this can happen.
Absolutely.
It
I
really
mean,
is.
I've just been through this legal study that was published in Northern Ireland. I think it's an exceptional piece of work, actually, even though I think there are additional things that should be noted in supplement to their suggestions. But what that study basically argues is that as things stand now, and as what occurred in the Lucy Letby cases, the system will allow bad science to appear in court, and it will entrust the system, the adversarial system of, oh, but lawyers are allowed to attack the people that are giving this bad science. It will entrust that to kind of wheedle out any problems, and then the jury will observe this process, and the jury, through some apparent superhuman ability, will then decide, oh, well, obviously this is all bad science, so we'll acquit the defendant. But it's just the minor problem is if they don't do that,
Mm,
then they defend that verdict to the death, even
mm,
though we now know all the science that is in this court case is crap,
mm,
absolute crap. Um, but it will now be defended as if it is the truth because of the verdict. And instead of when Judge Goss has the opportunity to throw out Evans, for example, which he should do objectively, instead of doing that, he entrusts the adversarial system. It, Evans is basically just allowed to say, "Well, I was a doctor." That's once he's in the NCA list and he's a doctor, he's basically not going to get thrown out unless there's extraordinary circumstances. And the judge just entrusts this adversarial process to somehow come to the right decision. And then if it doesn't, if you have a court process such as this that is full of lousy science, and they come to the wrong decision, they just say, "Oh well, that's the jury's decision. We can't introduce anything new."
mm.
It's actually unbelievable.
It really is.
It is like something like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or Kafka. I mean, it's just it is like something you'd make up for a satire, isn't it? It's not like we know this science is wrong. Oh yeah, but you could have said the science was wrong 3 years ago and you didn't. So we'll just keep this person in prison forever because we've decided in the courtroom that the science is okay, even though none of us are scientists.
Mm.
It's just mind-boggling.
No, it really is. It really is.
I don't know what else to say about it, really. But
Mm.
let's move on to your new thing that we're going to present today. So this is
Yeah.
really interesting. So
Yeah,
let's
so this came about. I'll give you a bit of background behind
mm,
this because for the non-medics watching, they're probably not aware about how hospitals are staffed. So obviously I'm going to speak for those that haven't listened to any of our previous videos before. I was a consultant in a unit that was a similar size to the Countess of Chester, and I worked mainly in obstetrics. I did gynecology as well, but my forte was high risk obstetrics, fetal
so,
medicine.
so before we go any further, just out of interest,
Yeah.
how many infants would you deal with on that unit at any given time when you used to work there?
Well, we delivered, roughly work it out per day, we delivered around about 3,000 babies a year. So I think at its height it went up to 3.2. So whatever that is divided by
Between
365.
about
So
six.
yeah, between us, but there were, out of the consultant body, and we've had a similar number of consultants to the Countess of Chester obstetrically. You each have your own specialist interest. So I did 80% of my job was obstetrics and fetal medicine, 20% of it also was gynae. And I had other colleagues that did, exclusively gynecology and some that did both. So I spent a disproportionate amount of my time on labour ward, on the antenatal wards and the postnatal wards. And that would have been similar to the guys at the Countess of Chester. And my job was probably similar to um, the consultant obstetrician. I won't name him, but the one that did most of the fetal medicine cases. So I'm thinking about he would have been responsible for the decision process in certainly the triplets, certainly baby C, and almost certainly the twins A and B as well. So my job would have been equivalent to him. So part of that would have been a very close working relationship with the neonatal consultant. So I think I'm in a pretty good position, particularly in view of the fact that our unit was a similar size to the Countess of Chester. So for the non-medics who've never sort of worked in a hospital, they've only gone in either themselves or with relatives. I think it's important to realise how hospitals are staffed. So, and I break this down into 3 working periods. So and for that I'm going to use a normal working day, so between 9 and 5. In reality, as a doctor, you don't tend not to work to those hours. You tend to work longer. The second time period is between 5 o'clock in the evening and 9 o'clock in the morning. So what we used to call the night shift. And the other time period is weekends. And then I suppose there are four in that you then have, bank holidays and special days, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, Christmas Eve, and New Year's Day, that sort of thing. So those days, weekends, out of hours, and particularly special days, so Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, Boxing Day, mean a lot to us, don't they, as human beings, depending on what your religion is. The problem is that they mean absolutely nothing in nature. And it was a big issue that I had, throughout my career as a doctor, in that, we are living and working in the UK in the 21st century. And it used to really rile me that different standards and quality and safety of care could be determined by luck. And there were certain things that happened throughout my career that highlighted that. And that was particularly the situation of and it's been highlighted. There was, I don't know whether you saw, Chris, this week, there was I can't remember which hospital it was in, but it was a maternity disaster that hit the press this very week, where this is epitomised. And this poor couple went into their unit expecting to have their first baby, and a flyaway comment was made to them because the unit was busy was, oh, ha ha ha, you picked the wrong day to come in labour, as if it was sort of the poor lady's fault that she chose to go in out of hours. Now, I believe now, and I believe throughout my career, that you can't run an acute medical discipline unless you can provide an equivalently safe level of care to the parents that you've got a responsibility to look after 24/7, 365 days a year. So it didn't matter a jot to me if I was, if an emergency happened on Christmas Day and I was on call. That was tough luck for me, not for the parents. You're being paid a pretty good salary to cover the unit on those days. So you have to be there. You have to do your job. But it became perfectly clear to me that wasn't the situation for everybody. And I'm pretty certain from, having read the RCPH report into the Countess of Chester and some of the interviews with some of the junior doctors in the Thirlwall inquiry, that there was a reluctance, a hesitancy to involve and call the neonatal consultants out of hours. And you can extrapolate from that probably extrapolated into weekends and particularly bank holidays and other holidays. Now, nobody likes getting called in. And I can remember, the worst possible thing for me as a consultant was getting a call at 3 o'clock in the morning on a frosty winter's night. You have to get out of bed, get downstairs, defrost the car, get in the car and get into the unit PDQ. And that's awful when, right at the trough of when you want to be asleep. But that's part of the job. That's part of what you're paid for. And, when there's somebody's life at stake by you getting in, then you get in. Nobody likes it. It's probably one of the worst bits of the job, but you just get on and do it, really. So that was on that's the background of what my concern was. Now, moving on now to how departments are staffed. So if you were to go into your local hospital tomorrow morning, Chris, at say 11 o'clock in the morning, you will notice that there are heaps of staff around. So you'll have peak nursing staffing levels, you'll have peak medical staffing levels. So in a neonatal unit, and that's going to be similar to across the corridor in the obstetric unit, you will always have a hierarchical tier of doctors who are on call 24/7, 365 days a year. So at the top of it, you will have a consultant on call, what I used to do. Below that, you will have what's now called a hospital doctor, or what used to be called a junior doctor. So you'll have what used to be called a specialist registrar. So they can range from being pretty inexperienced, so a year one registrar, up to, and it depends on the specialty, but up to 5 or 7 years of experience. So if you're lucky and you go in as a patient, then you'll have a very experienced hospital doctor there, and then below them you will have more junior doctors, what we used to call senior house officers, or specialty dependent, you may have house officers. So those are very junior doctors in the first few years of training. So as all 24/7, you will have probably, at least in units the size of Countess of Chester or Winchester, you will have 3 doctors on call 24/7. So that's the same between 5 in the evening and 9 o'clock in the morning as it is on a Saturday, a Sunday, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve. Okay. So out of hours at the weekend, you would have had a consultant on call, and probably most units of the size of the Countess of Chester, the consultant on call, if it's quiet or if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, those consultants will be at home at the end of a mobile phone, and part of the job requirement is to answer your mobile phone and to go in if the middle grade, the hospital doctor, what used to be called the junior doctor, needs your help. Now, that one of 2 situations will generally, except in an emergency, will provoke the consultant to come in. One of them will be that there is a clinical case happening where the middle grade doctor, the registrar, the hospital doctor, doesn't have the ability, the experience, the aptitude to be able to handle that case. So I'm thinking, and as an example of this, the classic one that comes to mind is baby K, because that baby, I think, was 25 and a bit weeks, and the middle grade trust doctor, hospital doctor who was on call when that baby delivered, was a first year registrar, I believe, or a very junior registrar. So it would have been completely inappropriate to have delegated somebody who was that inexperienced to do all of the initial care for that premature baby. So that's an example. The other situation is where there's just too much to do for 2 junior doctors to handle, and that's not unusual in specialties like neonates, paediatrics, because don't forget these doctors are also covering the paediatric ward. It's similar to how it used to be in obstetrics. So there were times when I would get called by the labour ward matron or band 7 to say, look, Martyn, the registrar's doing a cesarean section and we've got another emergency, can you come in? And you say, okay, that's fine, I'll be in, give me 10 minutes, I'll be in. Drop everything and you get in the car. So that's how. So 24/7, whether it's Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, or like now on a Sunday afternoon, there will be a consultant on call. They probably, if they're diligent, at a weekend, then the consultant should come in and do a ward round. It should, in a high risk specialty like obstetrics or neonates, you should do at least 1 ward round a day. And I would do a ward round in the morning. I would phone up in lunchtime to find out what was going on, sort of do a board round with the registrar, and then probably go in the afternoon or evening, or at least phone up, and then again at 10 o'clock just before turning the lights out. So I would question whether or not that sort of high level consultant involvement was going on at the Countess of Chester, from what we can glean is in the public domain. So that's basically how staffing should occur. Okay, so there are situations, there are times when staffing levels are undoubtedly lower, but because of that, you don't have clinics going on, you don't have any routine activities going on, but you should always have a level of senior doctor involvement that provides a safe and effective level of care to the patient. So what I've just done, and I haven't done stats on this, and I know it's going to open me up to criticism from the trolls, but this was stimulated by watching Peter Elston's last couple of videos, and when he was, particularly second one, when he was presenting the big deal about Letby always being there, it just made me think about what we've just been discussing, because it just dawned on me that I'd never seen any details about when the bad outcomes for the indictment babies have happened. So I kept freezing Peter's graphics, and then I downloaded the data. So I don't know whether you can put up the.
Yeah, let's put it up now. So we've got a. There we go. Right.
So this is very crude. I haven't done any stats on it, but it's a bit. I'm sure people criticize this as just an exaggerated pictorial representation, but I think this is worthy of note in view of what I've just been talking about. So what I've done now on the left-hand column is the babies. So people recognise the letters of the indictment babies, and you'll notice with the first down to row 8 there, if you then move along to the charge, those are the murder cases. So those are the cases that Letby was convicted of murdering, and then down at the bottom, baby K. So these are the ones that most people are familiar with. So baby K was the
extubation case.
Yeah. So that's down at the bottom.
Yeah.
And then most of these, most of the other columns you don't need to worry about. So column D there is were these on the indictment, and column F is whether these were cases that Dowie Evans thought was suspicious. So what you'll notice, what I've done there is the red boxes, so the event date. So these are most of these, because obviously they're the murders, is the time that the baby that died. So it was the sentinel event for which Letby was prosecuted. And so the red boxes are, so in the event date, those are weekends. So those are sort of out of hours at sorry, a weekend. So from what I've just said, you're then going to have one consultant, one registrar or hospital doctor, and one senior house officer. And then the other column, so the column that's almost, apart from 4 boxes out of the 17 cases, entirely red, is the time that these sentinel events occurred. And just look what that shows. So only 4 of the cases occurred. Sorry, 3 of the cases occurred non-weekend days and during normal working hours, and 1 of the cases of those 4 occurred at the weekend, but was just after lunchtime at 2:30. So look at the timing of all of the other cases. So they're either late in the evening or in the small hours of the night. One case being just before the changeover of staff. Now, I know this doesn't prove anything, but we know from what was raised in the RCPH report, and we know from when the junior doctors were interviewed under caution in the Thirlwall inquiry, that there appeared to be hesitancy to refer up the chain of involvement to consultant level, and there was a hesitancy from some of the consultants to get involved with cases. Now, you could argue, this is very crude what I've done, and there's 2 arguments that I'm sure will get thrown back at me. One of them is, oh, well, maybe it was just Letby selected the cases when she knew staffing levels were going to be lower. I get that. Maybe it is. Maybe it is, but maybe in view of what we know about the functioning of that unit, there's a more plausible explanation here, in that there was a reluctance to either call or reluctance to attend by the consultant. And the other criticism that could be thrown is, or maybe it's just that, whatever the processes were that caused these babies to get into trouble, it was more likely to happen after sunset. I get that, but is there any direct statistical evidence to back that up? So this doesn't prove anything, but I just thought it took me half an hour just to do this, and when I did it, and more of the boxes were filled red, I thought, oh, this is interesting. It casts another sort of question mark over things, I think, and I think it is potentially indicative of the nature of what was going on in that unit. And I suspect it was no different from what's available in the public domain about the level of seniority of, on my side of things, the obstetricians that were making decisions and doing deliveries. Again, a lot of those cases were out of hours or at the weekend. And again, we're back to the same story with the obstetric side, that where are we with anybody getting to look at the notes to find actually who was involved, what was the label, the level of consultant involvement, and could there have been a different outcome if that had been different. So I just thought it just made me raise an eyebrow and think, oh, is there anything here, and could this be relevant? And it was harping back to something that I felt very strongly about when I was a consultant, because you cannot run a hospital anywhere, but particularly in a country like the UK, unless you can provide safe and effective care 24/7. So it was just another little question mark to throw into the melting pot.
An interesting aspect of the whole thing, for sure. So I'm going to ask you some questions now as well.
Go for it.
Just to finish. Let's begin by... Oh, let me just mention, actually, before I ask you the question, I have stayed in the house of my friends, one of whom's a neonatologist and one of whom's a paediatrician. And I was quite alarmed by the extent to which they could be woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this is not... I was looking at... I mean, I know it's a privileged role and it's well paid, but I mean, it's tough. They worked incredibly hard, and then they weren't necessarily guaranteed sleep. And I thought, this I would struggle with this. So I just
I know it's, I can remember some nights, and it depends. And the problem is, as a consultant, you can't resent the guys that are covering the fort in the hospital, and then you just have to, when you get your rota sent out at the beginning of the month, you make a note in your diary about which nights you're on. The next thing you do is you look and see which middle grade is on call that night, because that basically determines how much sleep you're going to get. And in a unit of Winchester's size, where we only had one tier of middle grade cover, so you didn't have sort of a junior registrar and a senior registrar, which is what you get at bigger units, say Southampton or Liverpool. Then if you were unlucky enough to be on call with a first year registrar, then you knew you were going to get every single big decision you would get called. And that could literally mean sometimes throughout my career, it literally felt like Chinese torture, because you would just drop back to sleep and then you get called again. And then you just drop back to sleep and then you get called again. And then you know in your heart of hearts that if somebody needed, for instance, in my specialty, a cesarean section, if it was anything other than a completely straightforward cesarean section, you'd have to go in. And I think it's changed now, but in the days, certainly in the early days when I was a consultant, you could have a night where I would barely get any sleep at all, but then you'd have a full working day the following day. So you'd have to get up and go into work and do a clinic and an operating list in the afternoon or something, or a scan list. So that's changed now. But yeah, God, yeah, it was. I can think some night, and then you could be very lucky, and then you could be on call as a consultant with a final year senior registrar who you had absolute faith in, and sometimes you would not get called at all. But it was just pot luck how the rota worked out, really. So yeah, I'm sure you're in neonates, and it would be the same. There are specialties, of course, where that things like dermatology or some of the medical specialties where you probably almost forget you're on call at night. But certainly in high impact, high risk specialties like obstetrics, neonates, general surgery, A&E, it's not very conducive to getting your beauty sleep, really.
No, absolutely. Yeah, so it's just interesting to hear that, I think. I saw that at close quarters, so it was interesting to see. So you mentioned Child K earlier, so let's ask a question about Child K. So this is quite a lengthy question. Question for Martyn in relation to baby K. Mother was in premature labour and only available cot and bed for mother was Preston, so cancelled due to the distance, said they didn't want the risk of her delivering en route. Why did they not keep trying for an available place within the area? That's the first question.
It's the first question. It's a very good question. It's always whenever you're break that question down, without you will not get a single obstetrician or a single neonatologist who could successfully argue that it is less safe to do an ex utero transfer of a premature baby than it is to do an in utero transfer. So that big posh words. So I'll explain that. It is far safer for the mum and the baby, probably across gestations, but particularly with preterm babies, to do an in utero transfer. So by that I mean transferring the mother before the baby is delivered. So you get the mother with her baby in utero before she's delivered, and then you allow the receiving unit to do the labour, delivery, or cesarean section. That is far safer than delivering a baby and then having to put all of the lines in, intravenous lines, an endotracheal tube, which we know from several of these babies, baby K being a prime example, twin A being another example, and Noah Robinson being an even better example, where putting these endotracheal tubes in is not necessarily straightforward. So you have to put all these lines and you put the endotracheal tube in, and then you either have to call a transfer team, so that's an ambulance-based team of nurses and a neonatologist, possibly an anaesthetist, and an ambulance crew to transfer the baby ex utero. That is far more hazardous, and there's ample evidence that is neither in the neither in the mum's nor particularly the baby's interest. So in a situation like this with baby K, it's a judgment call. It's a judgment call of the principally the consultant obstetrician and the consultant neonatologist to say, well, how much time have we got? And what the worst scenario out of everything is that you make the decision, no, okay, we'll take a chance. And is normally with Southampton with us or Portsmouth, which are our nearest tertiary level units. Have we got enough time to get this mother in an ambulance and to safely get her to Southampton or Portsmouth before the baby's delivered? The worst possible thing is you get halfway down the M3 and the baby's delivered. That's what you want to avoid. So it's a judgment call with normally a detailed high-level discussion between the consultant obstetrician and the consultant neonatologist. And how urgently do we need to deliver? If it's a premature labour situation, then you basically, based on what the findings are, how often is the lady contracting? Can we stop her contracting? Is the neck of the womb showing signs that this baby's about to come out? Bearing in mind that preterm labours can sometimes be very quick. Or have we got time? Can we transfer, knowing that the safest option and the best outcome is to get the baby to the receiving unit before delivery occurs? Now I can't remember with baby K what the time delay was between presentation and delivery. I have a feeling this was a case where it was quite a while. So that situation of have we got time to transfer needs to be reappraised regularly. So if say you're facing the situation at Winchester now, and I was the consultant on call, well, if we made a decision that no, we can't run the risk, we'll keep you here and deliver you here. The neonatologist would then get everything ready to receive the 25-weeker, bearing in mind that the whole thing with baby K is that baby shouldn't ever have been delivered at, or electively delivered at, the Countess of Chester anyway. It should have gone to a tertiary level unit, same as Winchester. But if the following morning comes, so if you're doing your ward round at 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock on the Monday morning, and that lady's still there and hasn't delivered, and if the contractions have died down, then boy, oh boy, you get on the phone then back to Southampton or Portsmouth or Liverpool and say, well, look, this lady hasn't delivered, the contractions have died down, we don't think she's imminently going to deliver, can we transfer her down today? And of course, the receiving unit, it can be complicated by they might have then filled the cot that they made available last night with another baby, either their own or another one transferred in. So by definition, it's a decision of flux. The concern I have about what was going on in Chester was that undoubtedly they were looking after babies that were way beyond their level of competence to do. But why was that? Why were the obstetricians deciding to keep patients local and not arranging? And was that financially driven? Because neonatal care it pays well.
Yes.
And particularly when you're looking at prem twins and prem triplets, then boosting your cot usage, increasing your cot usage above the number that you're supposed to accept, forgetting naively that maybe you haven't got enough number of neonatal nurses or experience of neonatal nurses to safely look after them, seems to have been an issue of secondary importance at Chester, which is really concerning. So that's basically it's a decision that should be made at the highest level, consultant to consultant, and it's a decision that you need to be in a position to reappraise if the baby doesn't deliver.
Yes, so that's all very interesting. I'll read out the rest of this. I don't know if you can add anything. There's a kind of further question, but you've pretty much answered that anyway. But I'll just read this out, and you may have further thoughts. So the person that's written this question says, it seems that they just held on to her knowing she was only 25 weeks. I was always pushing for transfer to the Liverpool Heart and Chest Centre of Excellence for any patient needing urgent transfer. It seems that maternity weren't putting pressure on to get that urgent bed and certainly held on to the baby after birth instead of pushing for immediate transfer. Could Martyn explain the protocols and procedures in cases like baby K and what more could have been done for the safety of both mother and baby? Do you have anything to add based on that?
Yeah, I think I've covered that in my answer. I mean, of course, yeah. I don't know with baby K, what date she was admitted on, what time she was admitted on, who was involved with doing the the need for delivery assessment, who was involved with the discussion between the obstetricians and the neonatologist about do we transfer out. And I guess the critical thing with that baby is the gestation of 25 weeks, because that's top end. Even if that baby comes out in tip-top shape, then the whole reason for centralisation of these particularly extremely premature babies, and 25 weeks to fit into that, is because you need the top end of neonatal excellence to safely manage and optimize the outcome for these minute babies. We're talking about babies that would sit in the palm of your hand. So to answer that question accurately, you'd need to know who was involved with the decision process, and how frequently was it reappraised. I think from memory, I'm pretty sure with baby K, I think that baby, I might be wrong, but I think that baby only got 1 dose of steroids. Now, steroids, I think we discussed in a previous discussion, a remarkable discovery, and probably one of the most significant discoveries in modern obstetric practice, was that we found out that if you give mothers injections of a high dose of steroids, it's normally 2 doses given, separated by 12 hours ideally, so you get two doses in 24 hours. If you can time those, so you give them to the mother, and the effect on the baby is it stimulates the little cells in the baby's lung that produce what's called surfactant, which is sort of a greasy, like washing up liquid fluid in the lung. So it enables a baby to optimally make the transition from being in a water breathing environment inside their mums to being in our air breathing environment. So the steroids cause that to be produced earlier than it would normally be. I think I'm right in saying that with baby K, that mother only got 1 dose of steroids, even though there was ample time for her to be given more. And we know for absolute certainty that the optimum management for babies, certainly, the more preterm they are after 24 weeks, the benefit to the baby. So, you have to question, again, with this baby, and it extrapolates to some of the others, that, and again, if you think about baby D, that was the howler with not giving that poor antibiotics that led to the baby getting a congenital pneumonia, which was undoubtedly the cause of death. You really have to question about, who, as I said all the way along, I thought it was remotely unlikely what unfolded at the council suggested that it was purely going to be a neonatal problem, and almost certainly it was going to be an obstetric issue as well, as it is in most of the other failing maternity units around the country. With baby K, well, why wasn't this baby given 2 doses of steroids? I'm not certain. The other thing, that babies this premature, the mum should be given a magnesium infusion prior to the delivery, which again reduces the risk of the babies being delivered with complex neurological problems. Now, I don't know whether that happened, but it's just another question mark, a bit like what I said about the timing of the deliveries earlier on. It's another question mark about who was actually doing the labour ward rounds, and what level of seniority, and how were, none of this is rocket science, Chris. All of these things about making sure, have 2 doses of steroids been given, has the mum been given antibiotics 24 hours post rupture membranes? If not, tell the neonatal nurses they need to tell their doctors to give antibiotics as soon as the baby's. None of this is rocket science. This is medical student level obstetric and neonatal practice, and it seems to me that even that level of basic care was not optimally managed at Chester.
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to ask you a kind of general question about nursing as well. What role did nursing play in the outcomes that you had for both mother and baby? What were the nurses good at? How did you rely on them? And what areas do nurses perhaps do better than physicians?
Okay, I need to broaden that a bit, because obviously as an obstetrician, most of my interaction would have been with midwives. My nursing interaction would have been on the gynecological side.
Okay.
Hugely important, and that was yeah, thinking back to, I won't revisit old grounds and previous interviews that we've done, Chris, but thinking about why I did what I did back in 2019 when I whistle blew, one of the principal motivators for that was becoming increasingly disillusioned with the working conditions and staffing levels that my midwifery colleagues were being exposed to following the merger of my hospital with the neighbouring trust. So yeah, massive, because you've got to remember the midwives in obstetrics, maternity, and the nurses in gynecology, they're with the patients way more time-wise than we are. They're on the ward all the time. They're in the one-to-one care when the ladies are in labour, and postnatally, perhaps not so constant contact with them. Whereas as doctors, we most of our input is doing ward rounds, making clinical decisions on the patients, and then you go away to do something else. And then in labour, you tend to be involved more, particularly if somebody's labouring and having the heart rate of the baby monitored. You're in and out of the room more, and then surgically doing deliveries, doing cesarean sections. But you're entirely dependent on the midwives in maternity and nurses in gynecology to support you in maximising the efficacy of the service you're providing and the safety to the patients. So hugely important. And I wouldn't have been able to do the job that I did without. And I felt incredibly privileged and lucky with the level of support and input that I had from the midwives and the nurses throughout my career. And particularly my own specialty in obstetrics with the labour ward team, the band sevens, the coordinators on labour ward. And then I guess what happened more in the latter stages of my career is that more of them became specialised and took on more senior and more independent roles. Some of them I had the great good fortune to train to scan, for instance, and then they became independent scan qualified midwives. So yeah, I couldn't speak more highly of the critical importance to any doctor, whatever specialty you work in, of the nurses and the midwives in the care that they provide the patients, and assisting you in pretty much every single aspect of the job that you do. Without them, you would be completely lost. Hugely important. And when it works well, it's a critical interprofessional working relationship. When it works badly, which unfortunately is what's been going so badly wrong in the UK, is when you get sort of silo working where the two disciplines don't work well together. So you have midwives pulling in one direction and the obstetricians pulling in another, and that's one of the things that has to be addressed by the maternity reviews. And we won't go into that now, but that's multifactorial why that can go so spectacularly wrong. So hugely important, nurses and midwives.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last question I'm going to ask you today is a question about updating your skills. This applies to Dr. Evans as well, not just the consultants, but the question is about the consultants. It's apparent the consultants were not keeping up to date on their skills or even their neonatal knowledge. What did you do to ensure that you were up to date when you worked in your particular field?
It's a good question. I mean, as any doctor, as any nurse, you have a personal professional responsibility to your patients and being up to date. When you get referred, any patient, by a GP, by a midwife, then the patients come to see you as a consultant, expecting you to be at the top of your game. So whichever specialty you're in, they don't expect, and I think it's probably harder now than it was 20, 30, even 10 years ago because of the internet. Because most patients that you get to see in any clinic now, you can be damn certain before they come and see Mr. Pitman in the clinic, one or other or both of the parents would have got onto the internet. And particularly where we were around Winchester, with a very intelligent, high social class average patients, then it wasn't at all unusual to come in with printouts from the internet. So they say, oh yes, but and some of them, sometimes they come in quoting papers at you. And I used to really enjoy that sort of interaction because I used to see it as almost an intellectual challenge. So they expect, quite rightly, to come and see you as a consultant for you to be at the top of your game and to know all of the relevant research. So there's two sides to it. There's the factual, intellectual knowledge about it, and they also expect you to be at the top of your game doing practical procedures. So it is beholden on you to keep up to date with the academic side of things. So keeping up to date with developments, a bit like the Chase Shannon paper. If you're working in diabetology, particularly neonatal pediatric diabetology, I expect the consultants in that field to know about that now. So you're expected on a regular basis to update your knowledge. So on an annual basis, as part of your appraisal, you have to go to certain courses every 5 years. I think it was. You have to go to a week-long sort of update course at the Royal College, and then you're expected to keep up to date with and to demonstrate how many of the procedures that you were doing. So for me, say cesarean sections, amniocentesis, ultrasound scans, forceps deliveries, pontouse deliveries. Annually in your appraisal, you had to be able to demonstrate that you had done enough practical procedures to maintain your position as a senior consultant, really. Because the last thing you want as a patient is to be going in and having a procedure done by a consultant and this is where Dowie Evans fell down. Having a procedure done by a consultant that's only done one cesarean section in the last 2 years, that shouldn't ever happen. And then on top of that, and this came about post shipment that realised that you could actually survive as a doctor without being appraised. So annual appraisals came in. So throughout my career, I had an appraisal every year, and then post shipment they brought in GMC revalidation. So every 5 years, you had to go through a pretty rigorous, pretty laborious, I have to say, revalidation process, which took ages to do. And then you have to sit down with a senior colleague to go through that. And that included appraisals from your own colleagues, the 360-degree appraisals from your own colleagues, and also involved, I can't remember how many it was, but a significant number of patients you had to ask for appraisals of what it was like being a patient under your care. And then you had to document all the courses you've been on, all the training you've done, the number of deliveries that you've done, etc., etc. So, for me, that was a big issue with what happened to me because, I still don't understand here now, 6 years, 7 years later. I don't understand how I could sail through 30 years of annual appraisals and 2 absolutely textbook GMC revalidation appraisals, one of which was only a couple of months before the allegations against me were launched, where, for instance, my relationship with staff and interaction with staff and patients was exemplary. And yet, I was then challenged exactly on that basis. So it's a pretty rigorous annual appraisal and then 5-year GMC revalidation to make sure you're keeping up to date, that you are maintaining your expertise in your specialty, and that you are doing enough procedures to maintain your position at the level at which you're practicing. So it should be, fairly watertight. But then, when you hear that Dowie Evans hadn't even been on a neonatal, so that's in clinical practice. When you hear that Dowie Evans was as far as the police were concerned and the NCA were concerned, it was appropriate for him to be a neonatal expert, despite the fact that he hadn't even walked onto a neonatal unit for a decade, and that presented itself when the embarrassment, it came out in court. They didn't even know what they were talking about with some of the kit, because that kit didn't even exist when he last practiced. I mean, it's just staggering.
It's astonishing, isn't it? It's incredible. It just shouldn't happen, should it? It's a very sad situation. But as we were discussing at the start of this discussion, there's going to be a lot of fallout from this, and one of the aspects of it is going to be how are expert witnesses selected for court. It's clear that needs to change. It couldn't be any clearer, could it, really?
No, I mean, I think even if you look at, was it Judge Jackson who wrote to Judge Goss about? I just when I read the letter that Jackson wrote to Goss about Dowie Evans's recent performance as an expert witness, and that judge decreed that his expert opinion was worthless. And you just think, if you extrapolate that to being to a clinical aspect of being a consultant, if you were about to go in for an operation and you were made aware of a letter saying that, oh, I wouldn't let Mr. Pitman near me surgically because he doesn't have the his surgical techniques then you wouldn't let that patient operate on any of your relatives, would you? Sorry, you wouldn't let that doctor operate on any of your patients. So it seems the standard currently the standard of practice for medical so-called experts is just woefully poor. But I think Evans. I genuinely think he just thought he'd get away with it. I think he saw the Letby case as a very good earner, which it undoubtedly was for him. And I don't think he had any perception of the level of post-conviction scrutiny that the case would be placed under.
I mean, something I would like to raise at this point is, imagine if you were actually in a hospital and you had the circumstances surrounding the case of child E, where massive gastrointestinal bleed, and then one of the doctors on the unit said, "Oh no, your infant died due to an air embolism," which was part of the so-called diagnosis of Evans. And according to Dr. Bohin, the blood is irrelevant. Imagine if you went to a hospital and they said that to you.
Yeah, and you just got to look at there doesn't seem to have been a lot of joined up thinking about cross comparison of the cases, does it? Because if you think about that they trivialize the amount of blood that baby lost, and that wasn't just a revealed blood loss, because from my understanding of what was probably going on with that baby, as far as it being an upper gastrointestinal bleed, you can quantify obviously the amount that the baby vomits or the amount that comes up through an NG tube, but there's probably going to be, quantity wise, I don't know, probably an equal amount that the baby will have lost that just goes down further through the baby's gut. But if you then look at the similarities between that case and that they didn't, nobody called for O negative blood for that baby, and that's exactly the same as what happened with triplet O. As I said before in our previous recording, there are so many things about triplet O that I don't understand, but one of the biggest ones is when you've got absolutely obvious objective evidence that that baby's had a very significant, as it turned out, catastrophic bleed, why that baby wasn't transfused. So, what was the hesitancy in that unit? And you've got objective evidence of acute blood loss. What was the problem with giving the babies what they're crying out for, which is a blood transfusion? And I will never comprehend how baby O's resuscitation was abandoned without giving that baby the one thing that it was crying out for, which was a hefty slug of O negative blood.
I mean, I'm always very hesitant about criticizing anything because I've not been in that situation myself and so forth. But the delay in a transfusion just seems incomprehensible. I mean, I can't see why that happened.
Well, I would be very, very surprised. I mean, I've obviously never worked at Chester, but again, it's a similar size unit to Winchester, and it was obligatory every single shift in that unit. It was the responsibility of one of the senior midwives on duty to check that the O negative blood unit was not only available on the labour ward, but it was in date. And if it wasn't, they would go to blood transfusion, they would get it replaced. And the reason for that was exactly these sort of cases, that if you've got, a near or a mum, sometimes, I can think of, a handful of occasions, because when you have, catastrophic bleeding in obstetrics, sometimes you don't have enough time, even during working hours, to get cross-match blood over from the blood transfusion lab. So, you just say, can you, whilst you're waiting for it, can you get the unit of O-neg blood out of the fridge? And you just pull that in because it's a what's called a universal donor O-negative blood that you can give it to anybody and you're not going to cause antibody problems. And the neonatal, again, I can think of more than that number of cases doing deliveries of babies, normally babies that have become anemic through various different reasons. But I can think of numerous cases when I deliver babies that, and pretty much obstetrically, as soon as you make the hysterotomy, the cut in the uterus, you break the waters and you get the baby out and you look at the baby and it's as white as a sheet of paper. and you hand it across to the paediatrician, and you say, I think you're going to need the O-neg blood, and then it's just the doorway and normally a combination lock on the blood transfusion lab, and then the O-neg blood there, and you stick a needle in it, draw the blood out, and you give it straight away. I'd be very, very surprised if in a unit of the size of a cancer suggested that they didn't have immediate availability of O-negative blood on labour ward. So be used by the obstetricians or the neonatologist. If they didn't, then that again should be looked at, because again, you shouldn't in the UK in the 21st century be running a maternity unit without ready availability of O-negative blood. So it's again one of the growing list of deficiencies, and all of this will come out when the team of 4 obstetricians are looking at these cases, I'm sure, if it hasn't already.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for joining us again today. It's been very informative and illustrative as always. And we'll no doubt talk again soon. No doubt by the next time we talk, 10 other things will have happened that we can delve into. And
watch this space. It's never dull, is it? It's never dull.
No. I mean, I don't think we're being melodramatic when we say this is going to be an issue of enormous importance in this country. Maybe one of the most important things that happens in our lives, because it feeds into all of these critical social systems and failure in these critical social systems. So, yeah, I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger. But yeah, thanks, Martyn. Really appreciate it. And
pleasure.
We'll speak to you again soon.
Okay, cheers, Chris. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Bye now.
Bye.